And welcome back to JKLIVE here at Citizen Television. We're on the bench. We're talking mental health. We're talking a time to reflect, and also checking out our collective soul of a nation. Asking you the question, despite all that's happening around the country, is the country headed in the right direction? Sylvia Kasanga, former senator, is right next to me. Right next to her is Reverend Canon Evans Omolo. He's the provost of the All Saints Cathedral. And on the far end, Professor Lukoya Atwoli, Dean of Medical College at Aga Khan University. He's also a trained psychologist and also other titles he'll tell us later on. First up, folks, let's take a look at that video over there, the pictures over there on the screen behind you. That was a recruitment for KDF that happened at Embakasi a couple of days ago. They were only looking for 350 positions. And these folks showed up. They say maybe upwards of 7,000 showed up.
Yep.
Senator, what does that say? What does that say about us?
I remember, Jeff, seeing these pictures on that day and thinking to myself, anyone in a position of governance today should be very worried about that picture. That's a time bomb. I am so worried for our young people. You know, these are our young people. And if this is what they're going through, there better be a team sitting somewhere to quickly rectify this situation. And you see, this is what we see outside, like we were saying. But in the offices, it's happening the same way. I run my architectural practice, and I can tell you I have CVs upon CVs. You know, students who've just left school with their aspirations, with their papers, and there's nowhere they can go. Even from this recruitment, when you had the few who were followed to give their accounts, and said, you know, the qualification was this, I've tried for the 4th time, I've not been able to, I have met all the requirements, but suddenly the bar was changed higher, obviously because there are so many, and they're looking for just a few. The souls of these young people are being crushed every single day as we go. And it's really worrying. Actually, we should be worried as a nation.
Prof, is the senator right? Is this a ticking time bomb?
It's an exploded time bomb. It's not ticking anymore. It has been ticking for decades, and it's reached a place where there's desperation that is obviously spilling out into the fields, into the streets. And you see it every time we have a national disagreement over anything. We could disagree as much as, you know, naming something, and what happens is violence. You watch videos on social media of people beating up somebody, and you will always hear somebody in the background saying, "Ua, ua, ua." Why? So it's no longer a ticking time bomb. It's already exploded, and we're now feeling the after effects. And the effects of this, these are effects of things that have been simmering over time in the entire country. They are products of our dinner time conversations with our siblings, with our children, with our families. They are products of the political discourse, what we talk about out here. They are products of how we are set up as a nation, none of which does any good for us mentally.
Yeah. And Reverend Canon, I'm sure you see this every Sunday during your sermons.
Terrible, Jeff, as my two colleagues say, I think we are truly in a crisis as a country. And people who pride themselves to be holding leadership positions, whether in public service, whether in private sector, whether in religious institutions like myself or elsewhere, I think all of us collectively should be worried that, as Professor Atwoli says, we are headed potentially for disaster. If there's no immediate corrective measures are taken, then we may see terrible things happening. In the likes of Tunisia, you remember the likes of Libya, and other countries in the East.
Reverend Canon, I'm glad you mentioned Tunisia, because that's the Arab Spring, right? Tunisia kicked off the Arab Spring, and I thought around 2011, the scene of the vegetable seller setting himself on fire. A few days ago in Mombasa, a young man, a 27-year-old, by the name of Robert Gituku, set himself on fire. He was holding the Kenyan flag, set himself on fire. People were filming and almost encouraging. Well, where have we gone to?
Oh, man. Can you imagine something that overcomes the usual inhibition we have of hurting ourselves? You know, when you get a small cut, how painful that is. when, you know, hot water spills on you somewhere, how painful that is, and how you do everything in your power to prevent things from hurting you. And then you go and set yourself on fire. Can you imagine what you need to have gone through in order to get over that hill of inhibition and actually go ahead and harm yourself? It's huge.
It's big.
It's huge, and it's not something that somebody sits down one day and says impulsively, let me go and burn myself. This is something that has happened to this person. This person has been thinking about this. This person thinks, I have done everything possible to deal with whatever it is I think is a problem. And now I think the solution is to do this to myself. And this is a tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah.
Because by the time somebody dies by suicide, because that's what it really was,
yeah.
There are hundreds of people going through the same circumstances who we can't see, who are doing things that we are not aware of. They're not in the limelight, they're not being filmed, and so on and so forth. So when you see events like those happening every so often, you worry about the state of the mental health of the people from which this person is coming from. What's going on down there? How many more are we going to see?
Yeah.
What do we need to do in order to prevent scenes like this from happening?
Senator, that's the question. What do we need to do? Because they are getting worse. The suicides
Absolutely.
are rising, and amongst the young people too.
Exactly.
What do we need to do?
Jeff, let me tell you, if you might not know, we actually have a mental health act in this country, a fresh one, signed into law last year in 2022. And that has been a long journey. It's a journey that started in 2018 in the last parliament when we introduced the bill. And it led to a task force. I think Dr. Lukoya was part of that task force that was led by Dr. Frank Njenga. That was towards late, early 2019?
2020.
Yeah, they started working in 2019.
2019, late
I remember.
2019.
And that task force report already identified first what are the social determinants that cause mental health. It went ahead to state that this is a national emergency. It should be declared as a national emergency. That was before COVID. That was before COVID.
Yeah.
Already before COVID, we were already doing badly as a nation. And you know, we don't have enough data and statistics. We've been using what the WHO gives us, some of it which is quite old. Already by that time, 2018, I remember the statistics we were using are 1 in 4 Kenyans suffer from a mental illness, you know, and there are many other statistics. We know the gap that there is. In 2018, we knew the gap that there is in service provision for mental health.
And we didn't do anything about it.
We had not done anything. Then come COVID.
It's exacerbated.
Come election.
Yeah.
Come removal of tariffs and subsidies. Now, this is where we are. It was already so bad in 2018, Jeff. It was already so bad. It's not a question of what do we do. We know what needs to be done.
So to be fair, I think, to be fair, some things have been done, to be fair.
Okay.
Because some of the problems that were identified by the task force, the government actually started tackling them. So, for instance, setting up a true national center of excellence for mental health, that is Mathare National Teaching and Referral Hospital. It was made into a semi-autonomous government agency. He established, the previous government established an office of the Presidential Advisor of Mental Health to be a placeholder for what we had recommended to be a National Commission of Mental Health and Wellness, whose job will be to collect data and to help policy in the right direction to improve our mental health, and several other issues that were identified. The biggest elephant in the room is about financing, and that we haven't really pushed the button far enough to ensure that all Kenyans have access to the highest quality of mental health services as required by the Constitution. So it's not something that we're coming up with. It's something the people of Kenya sat down and said they deserve and they require the government to ensure that they all have access to the highest attainable standard of mental health services. We haven't reached there yet.
And there's something I have to report, Jeff, because I just found out about it today, and it's a positive step just to add on to what Professor is saying. As I was coming in, there's a board. There's now a mental health board.
Yeah.
Under the new act, it's there, which is beautiful. But they've not been able to do much, again, because of financing. But I was actually informed today that there have been good steps, that the PS and the Director General have actually started funding the board. So we should begin to see to see some movement. But I'll not lie that the vision that we had at the time when we started working on the Mental Health Act is a situation where we would have seen a battalion of, mental health workers in the counties, in the village, because it's about dissemination first of information. Yeah. It's about raising awareness on what are we dealing with. What is this thing we are dealing with? And how do we begin to identify somebody who is hurting? And then what is the next step that this person can be advised to do? It has to start at that level. And that level is at a grassroots level.
Let me ask Reverend Cannon right here. Do they come to you to talk to you when they have issues like what the senator is saying? Do they approach the church?
Jeff, I think by the nature of our church being a church in the city and imposing geographically that many people can see and access, if I gave you the statistics of the amount of people who either are members, who come for help, just for general counseling, or people who reach out to us through the social media, I'm part of the team that assesses what comes in through the social media. Every single week you won't get less than 3 people who are saying that I've got to the end of life, I want to take my life. Pastor, can you help me? Several, even this week, we got 2 who are inboxing and saying, I need help, can I get somebody to talk to? But thankfully, as Professor had said earlier, those are just the ones that come. Yeah. There are several and so many at the back end that don't even have that space to reach out. And therefore, from the space where we operate, you see it in marriages are breaking left, right, and center. You see it in the effect of the struggles that families are going through on children. Even when they come to church on Sunday, in a Sunday school, you see it all across the board. Like now, they're seeing me here with you. Tomorrow, I'll be having maybe 20 CVs asking me, I saw you with Jeff. Jeff is your friend. Please, can you tell Jeff to get me a job at Citizen? I have heaps of them.
Are you serious?
They say that you got a big network. I saw you with Professor. Yeah. Please, can you connect me? I graduated with a degree in psychiatry. Yeah. So I think, Jeff, where we are as a nation, there are issues around financing, but there are issues, I think, around mismanagement of resources we have to take care of basic things that we need to take care of. These things you can't see in mature democracies, in developed countries, but in this country, we waste resources terribly, and therefore, menial things like access to proper medical care, we cannot. Even like mental health.
Hold on, Prof. Speaking of wasted resources, I don't know if you saw our top story today. Yeah. We're talking about, 83% of what's collected in this country goes towards debt repayment. Yeah. 83%, meaning 17% is what's left.
Exactly.
And then the travel by the government, both local travel, about 4.5 billion shillings in local travel, 1.5 billion shillings in foreign travel. Jeff, I think as Prof comes on, I think, let me just say as it is, as black and white as it is, I think the current government is enslaved to IMF. I think our public debt is a shame and an embarrassment. And it's so embarrassing that there are people sitting in leadership positions who only think of manufacturing means of raising more resources from the citizen through taxation to service public debt. Yet, we are not looking at the wastages that are there. We are not looking at opportunities to generate more resources internally. As you see, huge guzzlers driving all around. You see unnecessary people being employed around just one person. And I think, Jeff, Kenyans are being pushed to the limit, and it's only a matter of time before things explode. Yeah. Prof.
I think it's a question of values. It's a question of values. Even as we discuss health and mental health, we have to ask ourselves, how much is the value of your average Kenyan's life? If a Kenyan drops on the street and is dying, how much compulsion do we feel to do something about it? That tells you about the kinds of values we carry around. And so this is what enables somebody sitting in a policy-making office to brush off and say, no, don't put that money in mental health. Even though they know and they've been given all the information that there are 25% of the population having severe mental health problems, and no money has been allocated, and I am sitting in a place where I'm allocating resources, and I say, don't allocate money there, because I don't value lives. The people we have put in charge of important sections of our society are people who do not value human lives. Or they do not value human lives other than those that are in the immediate circles, in the immediate families, in the immediate acquaintances. And that is something we need to tackle. We try to tackle it by trying to legislate values, by trying to put values in a constitution. That's not how it works. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It works by us taking actual action and saying certain things are taboo. Like you cannot go onto national television and tell a starving guy, go and plant maize. You're lazy, you're starving because you're lazy. Or your children are dying because you're not putting in enough effort. And I am in charge of making sure your children don't die.
Or go dig a well.
Go dig a well if you think this thing is too expensive.
Yeah.
This is a lack of values. And this is where we must tackle this. Because the leaders are exposing themselves as people who don't care about the people. Even if I know that there's going to be El Nino starting next week, I cannot come and tell you there's going to be El Nino next week, shauri yako. I am in charge of making sure I mitigate the effects of El Nino so that you can live your life and be productive and contribute to the development of this society. It is my responsibility as a leader to come and tell you this is what you need to do in order to avoid the effects of this thing that is coming. Rather than telling you I'm sitting here helplessly, eating, drinking, enjoying your money, and then telling you, shauri yako, you are going to be swept away by El Nino next week. And when you start dying, don't blame me.
Utadu.
This is a lack of values.
Yeah, that's true. Just to pick on that, actually, the lack of empathy from the leadership is shocking.
But why is that?
It's honestly absolutely shocking. And they don't realize that some of the comments they make, how much, the impact they have on us as we listen. It has a direct impact. There's a comment that will be made, there's a tweet, and some tweets are extremely careless. Honestly, absolutely careless. And they're sitting in the highest office. And when you see that level of carelessness, lack of empathy, then we know our leaders don't love us. So this bombshell we are talking about, it's just a question of an act that may happen and this country blows over. It is absolutely shocking. I'll tell you, Jeff, just after the governors had been sworn in, I went for a retreat with the Committee of Health of the governors. What is it called? The Council of Governors.
COGs, yeah.
I actually went there to present, because I'd written a letter, that my expectation now with the new act is that every county government now will have a budget line, because that's when the CIDPs were now beginning. There'll be a budget line for mental health for each county, because the act, of course, health is devolved. So it is envisioned that every county will have its own standing, board, mental health board or secretariat, whatever you want to call it, and a budget line. And I went to, to petition to the committee. But I can tell you, I have not seen too much. Some counties I know are have been on the forefront, but there's still not enough. Jeff, there's not enough. And I like what he has said about values. If our leaders don't love us, who is supposed to love us? And we've put them there. And these are the issues that are affecting us. At what point will we realize that mental health is everything? There is no health without mental health.
Absolutely.
There's none. We will not function if we are not mentally okay.
Yeah.
And we have to prioritize mental health at all levels, everywhere, workplace, at home. So a lot of awareness, a lot of education needs to be done. And this has to happen sooner than later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're actually late.
Reverend Cannon, you said you monitor some of the social media that comes through to All Saints, right? Since the past few weeks, taxes on the rise, cost of living through the roof, and then the fuel prices were increased about a week, 10 days ago. Have you seen a spike? Have you seen a sudden anger in Kenyans since then?
I think, I would say, and as I see people affirm this in social media spaces, I think Kenyans are patient and potentially over-patient. If we were in other countries, no, we wouldn't be seated smiling and still going to fuel and running and things like that. I think there's need for some pushback a little, because I think those who sit in spaces of making decisions are taking Kenyans a lot for granted. And using rhetoric that is meant to deceive and not portray the true picture as a scapegoat to covering themselves. And I think from where we sit, I am part of quasi-advocacy teams, and I think it's time now to push back a little so that a few things can change in this country, because we cannot just keep absorbing and absorbing. And the saddest bit of it, springing from the values that Prof talks about, is that these are laced with lies, that you're literally seeing these are lies, and people are just lying and lying. But the moment you touch on fuel, everything else changes, because fuel prices is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
You've just seen on your news that you're running from 7 o'clock up to 9 o'clock. What's happening with Kenyans at the border? It's a ban-year border. They're crazy going on the other end, because that increases everything. And the spiral effect of that affects literally every single person on every corner. It means the economy continues to go down, and the mental issues that we're talking about here will then continue to rise, as it were.
Prof.
Yep.
There's a study, I don't know if you saw Monday's newspaper, right? Civil service, about the really, really depressing numbers. And I'll get to some of the issues in a bit. But what Professor P.S. Gathesha was saying was that a year ago, 5,000 civil servants were diagnosed with mental health. 5,000. A year later, 13,000. That's almost 300%.
And that's an underestimate. It's an absolute underestimate, because there are many who have problems that are not reported because they're not getting the help that they need. There are many who have problems that are getting help without reporting to anyone because they are stigmatized at their place of work. People will start saying mwenda wazimu. There are many who have lost their jobs because of their mental illness. Nobody reports on that. There are many who have died by suicide because of their mental illness. Nobody's reporting on that. So the figures we are seeing are only what we call official figures. They're always an underestimate. You can multiply that figure by 10 within the civil service.
Alone.
And those are the number of people who have problems, who need help, and who need services, and they're not getting services. A study was done around here in Nairobi many years ago, looking only for depression among people who go to hospital for any reason. Like you're coming to hospital because of a headache, or a stomachache, and so on. And these guys went in and just looked for depression among these people. And they had not come to hospital for mental illness. 40% of them had depression. 40%. And they did not come to hospital because of depression.
No.
Out of those 40% with depression, only 4% had been diagnosed previously with depression. And out of those, a tiny perishing percentage were receiving any kind of care, any kind of appropriate care. And this is a situation that is prevailing even today. I will tell you, I mean, if you look within Citizen, 1 out of 4 people, and that's an underestimate, I repeat, has some mental health problem.
And yet, Senator, you're a mental health advocate. Why don't we open up? Why don't we speak about it? Is it the stereotypes that we're afraid of that will be called mwenda wazimu and all that?
There is a lot of stigma around mental health. And the stigma is because of lack of information, not knowing what it is we are dealing with, not understanding that this is a sickness or an illness like any other, and there's actually treatment for it. And treatment may not necessarily be medication. Doctor will tell you it's therapy, it is what, there are so many ways of doing this. But we don't know, we don't understand, therefore the need for raising awareness, the need for sharing information. In fact, I remember one time at the height of when we were advocating for the bill and the act, I remember us talking conversations that we even have to translate some of these things into mother tongue, so that when I go to Kambani, to my village, I may speak of depression and anxiety in a language that the people can understand. And that way they're not fearful to come out and address the challenges that they have. So these are things that we have, you know, sort of discussed. It's a lack of awareness. And just to add on to the statistics he's talking about, the youth, and Professor will tell you, as the expert, a lot of mental health issues start from a very young age.
Yes.
So there's a certain focus that needs to go to the young people. And the statistics are appalling. In fact, just this evening, I got these statistics from Dr. Alfred Gitonga. We are running a project with the Rotary Club of Lavington, and we are targeting the youth, interventions for the youth, because I think to the tune of 2 million young people in Kenya, the age of 13 to 24, require intervention.
2 million.
Yes. Yeah. Require intervention as we speak. Yeah. And we have to figure out how to reach these ones. they're in high school, they're at home in the village, they're in campus. We must figure out how this is going to be done. Part of the projects now that we are doing are using, of course, social media and using, platforms like the phones, USSD platforms, where we can be able to disseminate information and see how interventions can be done, which is one of the projects that we are doing. But really, the situation is crazy. The statistics are appalling.
And
scary.
Jeff, even where I work,
yeah,
you just see a parent just comes and says, my child has refused to go to school. Has just refused, nothing.
Just like that.
And what Prof is saying is really true. There are those who know that they have a condition, but there are those who find themselves, they just don't know why they're behaving the way they're behaving. Yeah. And those numbers are huge, huge, huge. That's why for us at All Saints, we've partnered with the Chiromo Hospital Group to run a program where we open up the church for them, create a space where people can log onto a portal they've created for self-check, that I can just check myself, and there's a helpline that you can always be helped. So I think there's a lot of need for awareness and channeling people who are suspecting or we are suspecting to be struggling to places where they can get help. I think that's a desperate need.
Wow. Goodness. Yeah. And then, Prof,
so
another study a couple of weeks ago said the escape from all this, drugs, alcohol, bangi, which could be drugs as well, mirror, they're opting for all that. And it's on the rise. It's on the rise.
Yes, and hard drugs.
And hard drugs.
We're now seeing an epidemic of hard drugs as well. So I will tell you that half of all mental illnesses will begin by the time somebody is at the age of 15, thereabouts. 3/4 by the time somebody is 25. 3/4 of all the mental illnesses will have shown signs by then. Then the remainder will be showing signs slowly. Some of the signs include this change in behavior that leads somebody to start using drugs. And often, many people using drugs, if they have a mental illness, is an attempt at self-medication. You feel a certain kind of way and you think if you use this substance, you feel better. And then it just drags you down and makes you feel worse and makes your illness even worse. Many of the things we do are attempts at compensating for how we are feeling so that we feel better. Often humans act to make themselves feel better and less uncomfortable. And a lot of the discomfort that many people experience is from psychological distress or a mental illness. So your compensation might be using drugs. Your compensation might be aggressive, violent behavior acting out. Your compensation might be staying away from people and keeping to yourself. And these then morph into signs of mental illness that require to be addressed. We are now working with a lot of the community-based organizations at AKU, at the Brain and Mind Institute, like Shamiri and so on, working with young people as well, collecting data. We're working with Befrienders Kenya, looking at the calls they get about people who say they want to kill themselves. Huge numbers. And this is a small operation receiving huge numbers of calls of people saying, I've given up, I want to die. And they have to deal with this. And many, many, many of them are young people who would be otherwise extremely productive if their issues were dealt with. So these are things that we cannot sweep under the carpet in this country. I will tell you that socioeconomic problems are a huge driver of mental illness. People who were doing relatively well and then became poor are at high risk of mental illness. And people who are poor in general, who cannot access basic necessities, are at high risk of mental illness. And people who become mentally ill also are at high risk of going into poverty because we don't address their problems and they don't remain economically productive. So it's a huge thing. Even in mental health programming, we have to say, whoever is in charge of ensuring the economy, make sure people have productive work, people have a living wage, people have access to basic amenities, security, health, and so on. That is part of mental health. Children get good education where their needs are taken care of. That's part of mental health. Nutrition is part of mental health. So even employment is part of mental health. So when we speak out and say there are certain things that need to be fixed in this economy, we're actually prescribing treatments for mental ill health. And we're prescribing interventions for promoting good mental health for our people.
Folks, I want to take a break, come back and talk about, there's no use of asking the question, when did the rain start beating? Because it started a long time ago.
Long time ago.
It's beating us
drenched.
down.
We're drenched.
We are drenched.
We are drenched.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, is there hope, folks? Is there hope?
There's hope.
There's always hope.
I hope so.
There's hope.
I hope so.
There's
Pardon the pun. We're talking to some mental health experts, folks. Is this resonating with you? I hope it is. Is there a solution? We're going to try and look for one. Professor Lukoya Twoli says there is. So does Reverend Canon Evans Omolo. They all say. And Sylvia Kasanga also says there is hope.
There's hope.
What do you think? Keep tweeting at Koinange Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, this hashtag JKLIVE.